There were 2 folders on that table by the end of the night. Mine and my daughter's. She just didn't know about hers yet. My name is Diane Whitfield. I'm 64 years old, and for 38 years I made Thanksgiving happen for my family. I made the stuffing my mother-in-law taught me to make in 1987. I set the table with the good plates that only come out twice a year. I stood in a kitchen that wasn't mine that night, my son Ryan's kitchen, and I watched my daughter Kelly slide a manila folder across the dining room table like she was passing me the gravy. "It's just a formality, Mom," she said. "So we're not scrambling later." She said it warm. She said it like she loved me. That's the part that still gets me. Even now, she really believed she did. Inside that folder was a power of attorney. And underneath it, a property transfer authorization with my name already typed in at the bottom, waiting for a signature. My grandchildren were still in the room. My son-in-law Tom was staring very hard at his water glass. My youngest, Sean, had gone still in the way he does when he's trying not to give something away. And my oldest, Ryan, wouldn't look at me at all. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I wasn't surprised. That's the part nobody at that table knew. Kelly thought she was springing something on me. She thought she had the advantage. 3 kids to 1 mother, a holiday to soften me up, grandchildren in the next room, so I wouldn't make a scene. She thought she was fast enough that I wouldn't have time to think. She had no idea I'd already made my decision 3 weeks before she ever opened her mouth. I reached down into my own bag. Not for a tissue. Not for my reading glasses. For a folder of my own. But to understand why I brought it, and why my hands weren't shaking when I did, you have to go back further than that Thursday. You have to go back to a kitchen that was mine, on a Tuesday, for days before anyone slid anything across any table at all. This story actually started there. I still live in the house Gary and I bought in 1988, back when Mansfield, Ohio was cheap and our mortgage was $211 a month, and we thought that was a lot of money. For bedrooms. 1 bathroom that's never been remodeled because Gary kept saying next year, and then there wasn't a next year for him. He died 14 months ago. Heart attack in the garage, changing the oil on a car he didn't even need to change the oil on anymore, because he liked doing it. I found him. I don't talk about that part much. I'm not going to now either. Just know that this was going to be my first Thanksgiving as only me, and I was handling that the way I handle most things, by cooking. I taught 2nd grade for 31 years. You learn things doing that job. You learn how to read a room of people who don't want to tell you what's actually wrong. You learn that the kid who says, "I'm fine," while staring at his shoes is never fine. You learn patience that looks like calm, but is actually just work you've gotten good at hiding. I raised 3 kids with that same patience. Ryan, now 38, a dentist, married, 2 kids of his own. Kelly, 35, married to Tom, a contractor. And Sean, 31, still renting an apartment across town, working at the hardware store, the one everybody worried about the least when he was young and worries about the most now, for reasons that have nothing to do with money. That Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I was standing at my counter with Gary's carving knife in my hand. It was his job carving the turkey. 30-some years, every single Thanksgiving, he stood at the head of the table and made a show of sharpening the blade first, even though it never needed it, just because he liked the little ceremony of it. Since he died, I've started doing it myself, the week before, alone in my kitchen, practicing on a chicken so I don't embarrass myself in front of everybody on the actual day. I don't know why I never told anyone I do that. I guess some things you just want to be yours. I was writing my grocery list on the back of an envelope, a habit from 30 years of never having enough scratch paper in a classroom, when my phone lit up on the counter. Group text. Kelly. Excited for everyone to be together Thursday. Quick logistics. Realtor thinks early Jan for listing, and Sunnybrook has a unit open in February, so timing actually works out great. We'll go over details after dinner, smiley face. I read it once and thought I'd misunderstood something. I read it a second time and thought maybe it was about someone else's house. Someone else's mother. I read it a third time and I understood it perfectly. I set my pen down on the counter. Not hard. Just carefully, the way you set something down when you don't trust your hand not to do something else with it. Nobody had asked me if I wanted to sell my house. Nobody had asked me if I wanted to live at Sunnybrook, which, for the record, is a very nice facility with a very nice dining room and absolutely nothing to do with anything I had ever said I wanted. I hadn't been asked anything. I had been informed. Politely. With a smiley face. I called my sister Barbara. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does, like she's been standing next to the phone waiting for one of us to need her, which, honestly, at 67, she mostly has been. They've already decided, I said. That was all I could get out at first. Decided what? The house. Kelly's got a realtor. She's got a date. February, for God's sake, Barbara. She's got a floor plan picked out at Sunnybrook, and I've never set foot in the place. There was a silence on the line, the kind Barbara only gives me when she's genuinely stunned, because normally she has an opinion loaded before I finish a sentence. Diane, she finally said, did anyone call you? At all? Before that text? No. Not one of them. Not one. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect the widow to cry at this part of the story, and I understand why, but that's not what happened. What happened is I picked my pen back up and finished my grocery list, because the turkey still needed buying whether my children had plans for me or not. I didn't know it yet, sitting there, but that was the last night I planned to walk into Thanksgiving as a guest at my own unraveling. Somewhere between finishing that list and going to bed, something in me had already quietly decided it wasn't going to be that kind of dinner. I just hadn't told anyone that part yet either. Here's something I should tell you now, because I don't want to pretend I found out about all of this and reacted in one single tidy week. That's not how it happened. 2 months before that group text, back in September, I'd already started noticing small things. Kelly on the phone asking casually, "Have you and Dad's lawyer ever talked about, like, long-term stuff?" "For you." I told her Mr. Held had done our wills years ago. Everything was fine. She said, "Okay, good, just wondering," in a voice that didn't sound like wondering. It sounded like checking a box. Ryan at his kid's soccer game saying, "You know, Mom, that house is a lot for one person." And me saying, "It's the house I raised you in." And him letting it go the way he always does, raising something and then dropping it, testing the water with one toe before deciding it's too cold to get in. What I didn't know then was there'd already been a Zoom call in October. My 3 children, sitting in 3 different houses, talking about my future, and nobody thought to include the one person whose future it actually was. I found out about that call much later. I'm telling you now because by the time that text landed on my phone in November, my kids weren't starting something. They were already in the middle of something. I was just the last one to find out I was in it too. But I wasn't only noticing my children that fall. I was noticing myself too. My mother was put into a nursing home when she was 61. Her sister and brother-in-law made that decision without her, called it for her own good. Moved her out of her house on a Tuesday while she was at a doctor's appointment so she wouldn't make it harder than it needed to be. I was 34, and I watched my mother go from a woman who ran a household to a woman who was managed in about 6 weeks. Sitting in that facility parking lot, I swore I'd never let that happen to me. And I swore I'd never do it to someone else either. So when the comments started piling up that September, something old in me woke up. Not panic. Recognition. I'd seen this movie before. I called Barbara first. She's the only person who was in that parking lot with me 30 years ago. "I think they're circling," I told her. "Circling what?" "Me. The house. I don't know yet. But I know what circling feels like." Barbara didn't tell me I was being paranoid. She's never once told me that in 67 years, which is one of the reasons I trust her more than almost anyone alive. "So what do you want to do?" "I want to make sure that if they land on something, there's nothing there to take." That's how I ended up, on a rainy Thursday in late September, sitting across a desk from Mr. Held. Gary's and my attorney for going on 22 years. A man who wears the same brown cardigan every time I've ever seen him and somehow makes it look dignified. I didn't tell him I suspected my children of anything. I told him the simpler, sadder truth. I was 64, recently widowed, and I did not want to end up like my mother. I wanted my house protected. I wanted the lake cabin, inherited from my own mother, nothing to do with Gary's estate or my children's opinions, set up so it couldn't quietly become collateral in somebody else's plans someday. Mr. Held listened without interrupting, and then said something I've thought about 100 times since. Diane, I've drafted a lot of documents like this. Usually it's because someone's afraid of a stranger. A scam. A caretaker. It's rare that it's family. He paused. Doesn't mean you're wrong to ask. It took most of October and part of November. Paperwork, signatures, a trust for the cabin benefiting my grandchildren's education directly, an amendment to my will that closed a very specific loophole. The house could not be sold, transferred, or leveraged without my sole signature. Not power of attorney. Not a family vote. Mine. I told exactly one person besides Mr. Held. Barbara. I didn't tell my children because I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I want to be honest with you about that because it would be easy to make this sound like a trap I set. It wasn't a trap. It was a door I locked in my own house, quietly, the way you lock a door before you go to bed. Not because you expect someone to break in, but because you'd rather be sure. By the time Kelly's text landed on my phone that Tuesday in November, the lock was already on the door. She just hadn't tried the handle yet. The night after that group text, I made 2 phone calls that tell you something about where my head was. The first was to Barbara, sitting in my living room with the TV off, and a cup of tea going cold on the side table. Are you sure you're ready for Thursday? She asked me. It's a fair question on the surface. First Thanksgiving without Gary. Anybody's sister would ask that. But there was something underneath the way she said it, a weight to it. And I understood exactly what she meant, because she's the one person who knew what I'd spent 2 months quietly doing. I've been ready for 2 months, I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. She already knew. Do you want me there? She asked instead. I want you there, I said. But not to fight my battles. I don't think I'm going to need anyone to fight for me. I just don't want to be the only one in the room who knows what's actually true. Okay, Barbara said. And then quieter. For what it's worth, Diane, I think you're handling this a lot better than I would. I laughed, a small dry laugh, the first one I'd managed in a couple of days. I don't feel like I'm handling it well. I feel like I'm handling it quietly. Those aren't the same thing. The second call was shorter, and it was the one that mattered. I want to confirm everything's finalized, I told Mr. Held. Before Thursday. Not after. It's been finalized for 2 weeks, Diane. The trust is executed. The will amendment is recorded. I can have a confirmation letter to you tomorrow, if that would help you feel settled. It would. Can I ask why the urgency? My daughter sent a text about selling my house, I said. She didn't ask me. She informed me. There was a pause, and then Mr. Held said something I've never forgotten, in that flat, careful lawyer voice that somehow still carried feeling. Then it's good you didn't wait. I picked the letter up 2 days later. Thanksgiving morning, I got up at 5:30, the way I have for 38 years, even though this year I only had to bring 2 side dishes to Ryan's house instead of hosting the whole thing myself. Old habits don't care whose kitchen you're cooking in. I made my sweet potato casserole and my green beans, the ones with the crispy onions Gary always ate straight out of the can. I wrapped both in foil, loaded them into the car along with a bag that had, tucked inside a zippered pocket I don't normally use, a plain manila folder. Ryan and his wife Melissa live about 20 minutes from me, a nice colonial with a wide front porch. I pulled into the driveway a little before noon, and as I was getting the casserole dish out of the back seat, Ryan's next-door neighbor, a pleasant woman named Carol, was out front dealing with her mailbox. Happy Thanksgiving, she called over. You too, Carol. She came over, friendly, the way neighbors do on holidays, and made the kind of small talk you make when you're mostly just being polite. And then she said, without any weight to it at all, like it was the most ordinary comment in the world. So exciting about your house. The realtor who came by last week seemed real nice. I told her that Street's been wanting some fresh energy for years. I stood there holding a dish of sweet potatoes with my name practically steaming off the top of it, and I said, "Oh, yes." She was lovely, because 31 years of teaching second grade will train a person to keep their face steady no matter what's happening underneath it. When's it going on the market, did she say? I might mention it to my sister-in-law. She's been wanting something on this side of town. I'd have to double-check the exact date, I said, which was true in the sense that I had no date at all because I had not known there was a realtor or a walkthrough or a week or any of it. Carol went back to her mail. I went inside and set the casserole down on Ryan's counter next to 3 other dishes and stood there a second longer than I needed to. Here's what I pieced together, doing the math the way you do when you're too polite to make a scene. The walkthrough had happened the previous Sunday. I'd been at church, sitting in the 3rd pew like I do every week, while a stranger with a clipboard walked through my bedroom, opened my closet, made notes about my carpet. A woman I'd waved to maybe 3 times in my life knew more about my own house's future than I did. I didn't confront anybody right there in that kitchen. I finished setting up the food, because there were grandchildren running through the living room and a turkey that needed to come out of the oven, and I wasn't going to be the woman who ruined Thanksgiving before the first roll was buttered. But something in me had shifted a little further. It's one thing to be told about a plan after the fact by your own family. It's another thing to learn about it secondhand from someone who waves at your mailbox. I found Ryan in the kitchen a few minutes later, pulling the turkey out, and I said, keeping my voice light, "Carol says the realtor came by last week. Sunday, I think she said." Ryan's hands went still on the oven mitts for just a second. Just a second. But I'd raised that boy. I know what a second like that means. "Yeah," he said. "Kelly set that up." I don't know, Mom, I figured you knew." "I didn't know," I said. "I'm sorry," he said, quiet, not really looking at me. "I should have asked. It wasn't much. It wasn't even close to enough. But it was the first honest thing anyone in my family had said to me about any of this, and I filed it away the same way I file away everything, because I was starting to understand that today I was going to need to remember exactly who said what and when. Dinner wasn't until 3. There's always a stretch of time in the middle of a holiday like that where the food's mostly ready and everybody's just orbiting the kitchen, kids underfoot, somebody watching football with the sound too low to follow. I went looking for the bathroom off the hallway near the laundry room. The laundry room door was half open, and I heard Kelly's voice before I saw her, low, the particular low a person uses when they think a half-shut door is the same as a closed one. I stopped walking. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. After the last 4 days, I'd earned the right to. "No, I know it's a lot," Kelly was saying. She's fine, she's just a lot to manage right now. Especially with everything since Dad." A pause. I couldn't hear the other end. I still don't know for certain who she was talking to. I've always assumed Tom, or maybe her friend Amanda who works in real estate, but I never asked because by that point it didn't matter who was on the other end. What mattered was what came next. If it closes by March, we can cover Tom's note before the bank calls it. That's the whole point of doing it now instead of waiting. I stood very still in that hallway. My own daughter's voice, describing me the exact way my aunt and uncle once described my mother. A lot to manage. Not my mother is grieving. Not my mother just lost her husband of 36 years, and this is her first holiday alone. A lot to manage. Like a stack of paperwork. Like a leaking roof. And then the number. Or not a number exactly, but the shape of one. A note, a bank, a deadline. My daughter wasn't describing concern for me. She was describing a transaction, and I was the asset on the balance sheet. I didn't go into the laundry room. I went into the bathroom instead, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the tub for longer than I'd like to admit. It wasn't the money that broke something in me. I'd already suspected there was more to this than Mom shouldn't live alone in a big house. What broke something was the mask slipping. For 4 days I'd been telling myself maybe I'm misreading this, maybe underneath the bad timing there's real love. And in that hallway, I heard, in my own daughter's voice, proof that concern and convenience had become the exact same sentence in her head. I don't think she was lying. I think she genuinely couldn't tell the difference anymore between what would help her and what would help me. That's sadder than if she'd just been cruel on purpose. I came out of that bathroom with my face arranged the way you arrange it when you've had practice not showing what you're carrying, and went back into the kitchen and asked Melissa if she needed help with the rolls. I have no memory of what those rolls tasted like. My mind was somewhere else, running the numbers the way I used to run a lesson plan when half of it fell apart with 15 minutes left. What do I still have? What do I need? What comes next? I found Sean alone in the kitchen a little later, refilling his coffee, and something about the way he was standing there, shoulders up near his ears, not quite looking at anything, told me he'd been waiting to be found. Sean is my youngest, and if I'm honest, he's the one I worried about most for most of his life. He didn't go to college. He works at the hardware store, still rents a one-bedroom apartment at 31, and I know his siblings have talked about him behind his back in that gentle, condescending way families do with the one who took a different path. What none of them seem to notice is that Sean is the only one of my 3 children who calls me on a Tuesday for no reason, who shows up with a 6-pack of the root beer I like, and just sits with me for an hour, not because he needs anything, but because he thinks I might be lonely. He'd been doing that more than usual in November. I'd told myself he was just being thoughtful. I didn't understand until that kitchen exactly what he'd actually been doing. "Sean," I said, "what do you know that I don't?" He didn't try to pretend he didn't understand the question. That's one of the things I love most about that boy. He's never been good at lying to me, even when he's tried. "Mom!" He set the coffee pot down. "I didn't know it was going to be like this. I swear to God I didn't." "Like what?" "The realtor. I didn't know about the realtor until Ryan mentioned it last week. I thought, Kelly made it sound like it was all still, an idea. Something you guys were going to talk through together. I didn't know they'd already." He stopped himself, ran a hand through his hair. "I've been coming by more because things felt off. I didn't like how Kelly was talking about it on the group chat. I figured if nobody else was going to just check on you like a normal person, I would." "What else, Sean?" He looked at the doorway, checking, I think, that Kelly wasn't nearby, and then he said the thing I think he'd been dreading saying all day. "Kelly asked me before everyone got here to kind of back her up. If you got upset tonight," she said something like, "Mom might get emotional. Just help me keep things calm. We don't want to ruin Thanksgiving for the kids." I stood very still. "She asked you to help manage my reaction," I said. "Not to help me understand what's happening. To manage how I respond to it." Sean's face went red in the way it used to when he was a little boy and got caught doing something he knew was wrong, but hadn't fully understood was wrong yet. "I told her I wasn't going to do that. I told her if you got upset, it's because something upset you, and that's not something anyone needs to manage." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it more than those 2 small words could really carry. "There's paperwork," he said then, quiet, like it cost him something to say it. "Tonight, after dinner. I don't know everything that's in it. I know Kelly's had it printed since Tuesday. I already knew there was going to be paperwork in the broad sense. The group text had all but told me that. But hearing Sean confirm it, hearing that it had been sitting printed and ready since 2 days before I'd even walked in the door, landed differently than I expected. It wasn't a plan anymore. It was a document. Documents have signatures on them. Documents are meant to be permanent. "Sean," I said, "I need you to trust me tonight, even if you don't understand everything that happens. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a long moment, something in his face settling, like a decision he'd already half made was finishing itself. "Mom, I've trusted you my whole life. I'm not about to stop now." I didn't tell him what I'd already done. Not yet. But I squeezed his hand and went back to check on the turkey, and for the first time since that group text, I didn't feel like I was standing alone in that house. Barbara found me a little later, out on Ryan's back patio, where I'd stepped out for 2 minutes of cold air. "You look like a woman doing math," she said, coming to stand beside me. "I am. Sean just told me there's paperwork coming tonight. Already printed. Since Tuesday." Barbara was quiet a second, then carefully, the way she does when she's sitting on something. "Diane, I have to tell you something, and I don't want you upset with me for not saying it sooner." "Barbara." "The oldest grandkid, Ryan's boy Cody, he said something to me a few weeks ago. Something about, my mom said Grandma might give the cabin to some scholarship thing." I brushed it off, Figured it was kids garbling something they half heard. But I didn't think about it again until just now. I felt something settle into place, cold and clear, like a puzzle piece you'd been forcing into the wrong spot, finally sliding into the right one. Barbara, I only told you and Mr. Held about the trust. In September. I know, she said. Which means somebody else knew about it too. Or knew enough to guess and say something out loud in front of a 9-year-old. We stood there a minute, working it through. The only people who could have overheard anything, I said slowly, are you or Mr. Held's office. Barbara, did you? I did not say a word to anyone, she said, an edge in her voice, not at me at the situation. I've kept plenty of things quiet in my life. I would not have talked about your trust to your grandson. I let it go, because it didn't matter exactly how the thread got pulled. What matters is this, I said. If Cody heard something about the cabin weeks ago, somebody in this family had already picked up on the fact that I'd made moves of my own. Which means this whole plan, the house Sunnybrook, isn't really a response to me being alone and struggling. It predates all of that. Barbara looked at me carefully. You think this goes back to October? I think, I said, that if this had been decided in October, then everything since, the questions about the lawyer, the comments about the house being big, the text with the dates already picked, none of it was them noticing something was wrong with me. It was them waiting for me to catch up to a decision they'd already made without me. The concern was never really about me being lonely in a big house. It was about them needing money, and me being the most convenient place to get it. Diane, Barbara touched my arm. Whatever you decide to do tonight, I'm behind you completely. I know, I said. You already told me that in September, when you helped me lock the door. We went back inside a minute later. Nobody noticed we'd been gone. That's the strange thing about a family gathering. A person can step outside and have their entire understanding of the last 2 months rearrange itself, and inside, everyone's still just arguing about whether the Lions are going to blow another lead. Before dinner was called, Kelly caught me in the hallway by the coat closet, out of earshot of everyone else. And I want to tell you honestly, for about 11 minutes, I let myself believe her. Mom, hey, can I talk to you for a sec? Her voice had dropped that clipped, organized tone she uses in group texts, and picked up something softer. Something closer to the daughter I raised. Of course. I heard Carol said something to you about the realtor. I'm really sorry. That's not how I wanted you to find out. That was supposed to be, the walkthrough was just a first step. We hadn't even decided on anything for sure, and I should have told you before it happened instead of after. That was a bad call on my part. I studied her face. She looked genuinely sorry, for the timing, for the awkwardness of Carol saying something before Kelly could control the narrative herself. I just want you to know, she went on. I'm not trying to push you out of anything, Mom. I love that house. This is just about making sure you're not stuck there by yourself, worrying about the roof and the furnace and all of it. I want things to be simple for you. That's all I want. There it was again, that word. Simple. I noticed it, filed it, and let it go, because in that moment I wanted more than almost anything to believe her. Thank you for saying that. I told her, and I meant it, at least the part where I was grateful she'd tried. So we're okay? She asked, something almost young in her voice. The way she needed to know a disagreement was over before she could relax. We're talking, I said. That's a start. She hugged me, quick and warm, and went back toward the kitchen, and for about 11 minutes. I checked the clock when Ryan called everyone to the table. I let myself think maybe this would resolve itself quietly. Maybe the walkthrough had been an overstep she genuinely regretted. Maybe the paperwork was something softer than I feared. I wasn't naive in that moment. I knew what I'd heard in the laundry room. But some part of me, the part that rocked her through an ear infection at 2 in the morning when she was 4, wanted so badly to be wrong about the rest of it that I let myself have those 11 minutes. Then Ryan called everyone to the table, and dinner was served, and I found out exactly how much those 11 minutes had been worth. I want to tell you about the dinner itself, because it's easy in a story like this to skip straight to the fireworks, and I don't think that's fair to what actually happened. Most of that dinner was just dinner. Ordinary, loud, a little chaotic, the way Thanksgivings with 11 people and 2 grandkids under 10 tend to be. Melissa had made a green bean casserole that competed with mine, which we both pretended not to notice. Ryan's youngest spilled cranberry sauce and got sent to wash his hands. Tom sat mostly quiet at his end of the table. Usually he talks business at these things, some story about a difficult client, a permit issue. That day he barely said a word about work, and when Ryan asked him directly how the company was doing, Tom said, "Oh, busy season," and reached for the potatoes like the conversation was already over. Busy season. In late November. I let that sit too. When it came time to carve the turkey, Ryan stood up out of habit. He's done it the last 2 years since Gary passed, taking over without anyone really discussing it, the way the oldest son sometimes does. "I've got it," I said, standing before he could reach for the platter. "Mom, I can do that," he said, already reaching for the knife. "I know," I said. "I want to." There was a small silence, the kind that happens when a family notices something has shifted, but doesn't have language for what, exactly. Kelly glanced at Ryan. Ryan sat back down. I picked up Gary's carving knife, the one I'd been quietly practicing with on chicken breasts every week since he died, the one nobody at that table knew I'd already made mine, and carved that turkey the same way I had every Thanksgiving of my adult life, clean, even slices, the way Gary taught me when I was 26. Nobody at that table knew it was the last time I'd ever do it without knowing exactly what I was choosing. I didn't know it fully myself yet, not in words. But something in my hands knew. We ate. We talked about nothing important. The grandkids asked to be excused to go watch a movie in the other room, and Ryan's wife took them, and for a moment it was just the 6 of us adults at the table, plates mostly cleared, the kind of lull that happens right before someone says, "Well," and the real conversation begins. I watched Kelly's hand drift toward the bag she'd brought in and set by her chair. I watched Tom's jaw tighten just slightly. I watched Ryan's eyes flick, once toward me, and then away, guilty, the way a man looks at someone he already knows he's about to fail to protect. I reached down for my own bag, resting against the leg of my chair, and felt the folder still there, exactly where I'd put it that morning. Before I tell you what happened next, I need one more minute in the quiet before it, because that quiet is where the whole story actually lives. I'd excused myself to the guest bathroom just before we cleared the table. Needed to steady myself, the way you do before you step into something you've already decided, but your body hasn't quite caught up to. I stood in front of Ryan and Melissa's mirror, opened my bag, and touched the edge of that folder with 2 fingers, just to make sure it was real. I want to explain what was in it because it wasn't some magic document that appeared out of nowhere. It was 2 months of unglamorous, deliberate work. In September, after the questions from Kelly and the comments from Ryan, I'd gone to Mr. Held and told him I wanted 2 things done, cleanly and completely, before anyone else in my family knew about either one. The first, the lake cabin, a small place on Pleasant Lake that had belonged to my own mother, entirely separate from the house Gary and I bought. Went into an irrevocable trust naming my grandchildren directly as beneficiaries, funds designated for their education. My children couldn't touch it, couldn't borrow against it, couldn't use it as collateral for anything, including, though I didn't know it at the time, a struggling contracting business. The second, an amendment to my will and a clause added to how my house was titled, closing the exact loophole a power of attorney could otherwise have exploited. My house could not be sold, transferred, refinanced, or used as collateral by anyone but me. Not Kelly's signature. Not all 3 of my children signing together. Only mine. I hadn't done this because I suspected a specific plot in September. I did it because I recognized a pattern I'd seen once before, in a nursing home parking lot, and I'd promised myself I would never again be a person things simply happened to. The letter in my bag was from Mr. Held, dated 3 weeks earlier, confirming both the trust and the will amendment were fully executed and in effect. Legally, whatever Kelly had tucked into her own bag that morning, power of attorney, property transfer authorization, was already meaningless. The house could not be sold without my signature, and I had no intention of giving it. I looked at myself in that mirror for a long moment. I didn't look like a woman about to destroy her family. I looked tired, older than I felt inside, and steadier than I expected. I wasn't nervous walking back to that table. I'd already done the hard part in September, alone, without anyone's permission. Tonight was just them finding out. I put the folder back in my bag, zipped it partway so it would be easy to reach, and walked back out to the dining room. Kelly waited until the table had mostly cleared of dishes. A small courtesy, I suppose, though I've thought about it since, and I think it was less about courtesy and more about staging. She wanted everyone still sitting there. She wanted the moment to have weight. "Okay," she said, reaching for the folder by her chair, her voice shifting into that clipped, organized register I'd heard on the phone in the laundry room. "So, I know today's been a lot, and I don't want to make this heavier than it needs to be. But since we're all together, I figured now's actually the easiest time to just knock this out." She set the folder on the table and slid it toward me. It stopped about a foot from my plate. "It's really just a formality," she said. "Power of attorney, and then some property paperwork, just so we're not scrambling to get everything sorted once things start moving in January. I already had the lawyer draft it clean, so you don't even have to think about the language. It's all standard stuff. If you just sign where I flagged, we're basically done." I looked at that folder. I looked at my daughter's face, open, earnest, absolutely certain she was doing something kind. "Kelly," I said, "why don't you tell everyone what happens by March if this closes?" The table went quiet in a specific way. Not the comfortable quiet of a family digesting a big meal, but the kind of quiet that happens when someone has said a sentence that doesn't belong in the conversation everyone thought they were having. Kelly blinked. "What?" "By March," I said again evenly. "If the house sells and closes by March, what happens then?" I watched something flicker across her face. Not guilt exactly, not yet. Confusion, mostly, the specific confusion of someone realizing the person across the table knows more than they're supposed to. "I don't, Mom, I don't know what you're asking." "I think you do." Tom had gone very still. Ryan was looking between his mother and his sister with the expression of a man watching two cars he can already tell are going to collide, and knowing there's nothing he can do about the physics of it now. "This isn't the time," Kelly said, and her voice had a thin edge to it now, the professional calm starting to strain. "Mom, can we just— the kids are in the other room, can we not do this right now?" "You brought the paperwork to the table in front of the kids," I said. "I'm allowed to ask a question at the same table." The room held its breath, and I felt, for the first time all evening, something that wasn't grief or hurt or careful calculation. I felt clear. I felt like a woman who had spent 4 days gathering exactly what she needed to say one true sentence in front of the people who needed to hear it, and had finally arrived at the moment to say it. "Is this about me?" I said. "Or is this about Tom's business?" Nobody answered right away. That in itself was an answer. I looked at Tom. He hadn't looked up from the table since I'd asked Kelly the question about March. His jaw was working, his hands flat against his knees under the table. The posture of a man who's been rehearsing a version of honesty in his head for weeks and never actually said it out loud. "Tom," I said gently, because whatever was about to come out wasn't going to be easy for him, and I didn't need it to be cruel to be true. "How bad is it?" He looked up, finally, and his eyes went to Kelly first, some silent question passing between them, and whatever he saw in her face, maybe permission, maybe just exhaustion at holding it alone any longer, made something in him give way. 80,000, he said quietly. "About 80,000, give or take. The equipment loan, and then a bridge loan I took out in the spring that I shouldn't have. The bank's been patient, but they called about the note 2 weeks ago. If we don't have something by March, they're going to move on the business." "Tom." Kelly's voice cracked, just slightly on his name. "I didn't want you dealing with this on top of everything else," he said to her, not to me, and I understood then that whatever else was true about that night, at least that part was real. A scared man trying to protect his wife from a fear he hadn't been honest enough to share with her either, not fully, Not until it was already this close to the edge. I let that sit in the room for a moment before I said anything else. I wasn't there to humiliate Tom. I want to be clear about that. I was there to make sure the truth was finally sitting on the table next to the folder, instead of underneath it, where it had been living for months. Kelly, I said, when you called me a lot to manage on the phone in the laundry room this afternoon. I heard you. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was walking to the bathroom and I heard my own daughter describe me the exact way my aunt and uncle once described my mother, right before they put her in a nursing home at 61, against her will, and called it love. Kelly's face had gone pale. Mom, I didn't, that's not what I meant, I was just... I know you didn't mean it the way it sounded, I said. That's what makes it so hard to hear. You weren't lying to me, Kelly. I think that's the saddest part of all of this. I think somewhere along the way, helping yourselves and helping me became the same sentence in your head, and you stopped being able to tell the difference. Ryan shifted in his seat, guilt sitting heavy and visible on him now. You didn't need to protect me from getting old, Kelly, I said, and my voice stayed steady because I had known this line was coming for 4 days and I had said it to myself enough times in the shower and in the car that by the time it needed to come out loud, it came out clean. You needed me to bail you out. Those aren't the same thing, and I'm not confused about which one this was. The silence that followed was the kind you could have poured concrete into. Mom, Kelly finally said, small. I was going to tell you eventually. About Tom's business. I didn't know how, and the house thing felt like a way to fix everything at once without you having to worry about any of it. You don't get to decide what I have to worry about, I said. That was never yours to decide. I'm your mother. I get to worry about whatever I choose to worry about, and I get to be told the truth in time to choose how I want to help, or whether I want to help at all. I reached into my bag then and took out my own folder, and set it on the table beside hers. I'm not signing that, I said, nodding toward Kelly's folder. And I want you to understand, I'm not refusing to help because I don't love Tom, or because I don't love you, or because I think $80,000 is more important to me than watching you two lose something you've worked for. I'm refusing because you tried to get it from me without asking. You tried to arrange things so that by the time I understood what was happening, it would already be done. I opened my folder and slid Mr. Held's letter across the table, past Kelly's folder, until it sat directly in front of her. This is dated 3 weeks ago, I said. The lake cabin is already in an irrevocable trust for your kids' education. All of your kids, Ryan's and yours both. And the house can't be sold, transferred, or used as collateral by anyone but me. Not with power of attorney. Not with all 3 of you agreeing together. Just me. Kelly picked up the letter with hands that weren't entirely steady, and I watched her read it, watched her go through the same 3 times rereading I'd done with her text 4 days earlier, watched the exact moment her understanding caught up with the words on the page. You already did this, she said very quietly. Before tonight. Before any of this. In September, I said. Before you'd even scheduled the Zoom call you didn't invite me to. I watched that land on Ryan's face, too. The specific detail he hadn't expected me to know about. How did you? He started. It doesn't matter how I know, I said. What matters is that this plan didn't start because you were worried about me being alone in a big house. It started because Tom's business was in trouble, and the timeline for that trouble happened to line up with the first Thanksgiving where I'd finally look, on paper, like a woman who could be quietly moved. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Kelly was still holding the letter. Tom had put his face in his hands. Ryan looked like a man watching his own choices from the last 2 months finally arrive at their bill. I'm not angry that you needed help, I said, and this part one said more gently because I meant it. I'm angry that you thought you had to take it instead of ask for it. If you'd come to me in October and said, Mom, Tom's business is in trouble, we're scared, can we talk about options? I don't know exactly what I would have said yes to. But I know I would have listened. I know we would have figured out something together. What I can't get past is that instead, you had a meeting about my life without me in the room, and you were prepared to have me sign paperwork at my own Thanksgiving table. Sean, quiet through all of it, spoke up then, his voice steady in a way that made me proud in a way I don't think I could have explained to anyone who wasn't sitting at that table. "I'm glad you did it, Mom," he said. "I'm glad you didn't wait for us to figure out we were wrong." Nobody screamed. Nobody threw anything. I want to be honest with you about that because I think a story like this can make people expect fireworks, and what actually happened at that table was quieter and, in its own way, harder to sit through than shouting would have been. Kelly cried finally, not performing it, just quietly into a napkin, while Tom put a hand on her back and didn't say much. Ryan cleared plates that didn't need clearing, the way people do when they need somewhere to put their hands. The grandkids stayed in the other room, watching their movie, blessedly unaware that their family had just come apart and started, tentatively, putting itself back together in a different shape. I left a little after 7. Ryan offered to drive me, and I said yes, mostly because I could tell he needed to say something and didn't know how to start. We were about 5 minutes down the road, the street lights sliding across the dashboard, before he finally spoke. "I knew it felt too fast," he said. "I told Melissa in October. I said something felt off about how quickly Kelly wanted to move on all of it. I didn't say it to her. I didn't say it to you. I figured Kelly had it handled, and it was easier to just go along." "Why didn't you say something?" I asked, not accusing, just asking. "Because Kelly's always been the one who handles things," he said. "Since we were kids. If she says she's got a plan, it's easier to trust the plan than to be the one who slows it down. I didn't want to be the difficult one." He glanced at me. "I think I've spent my whole life not wanting to be the difficult one, and today I watched what that costs, when nobody's willing to be difficult on somebody else's behalf." I let that sit for a second. "I know something about that too," I said. "I spent a long time thinking if I just kept giving, kept making things easy, everyone would keep choosing me. Turns out that's not really love. That's just a habit people build around wearing you down." Ryan didn't say anything for a while after that. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally said as we turned onto my street. Not a big speech sorry. I just mean it. I'm sorry I let this go on as long as it did without saying anything." "I believe you," I said. And I did. Ryan didn't ask me to forgive him that night, and I think that's exactly why I did, a little, right then. He just said he was sorry, and for once I believed he meant it, not because the words were dramatic but because they were plain. He walked me to my door. Didn't come in. Said he'd see me soon, and this time I believed that too. I let myself into my house, still mine exactly as it had been that morning, and stood in the front hallway a minute, then went into the kitchen and washed the one dish I'd used that morning, even though it didn't need washing again. Some habits just give your hands something to do while your heart catches up. I'd like to tell you everything got fixed quickly and cleanly after that, the way it does when a woman gives one perfect speech and everyone learns their lesson by the credits. That's not how families work. The weeks after Thanksgiving were quiet and not entirely comfortable. Kelly didn't call for almost 2 weeks. When she finally did, it wasn't to ask me for anything. It was just to ask how I was doing. Actually ask, and wait for the answer, which was different enough from her usual clipped efficiency that I noticed right away. "Tom and I met with a debt counselor," she told me on that call. "We're restructuring. It's going to take a couple years to dig out, and it's going to be tight, but it's ours to dig out of. We're not looking at the house as an option anymore. I want you to know that clearly. That's off the table. It was wrong of me to ever put it on the table in the first place." "Thank you for saying that," I told her. "I keep thinking about what you said, about the difference between protecting someone and needing them to bail you out." Her voice caught a little. I think I'd stopped being able to see the difference. "I think I got so scared about Tom's business that I convinced myself doing this to you was doing it for you. And I didn't examine that very hard because examining it would have meant admitting how scared I actually was." I didn't tell her it was all forgiven in that one conversation. It wasn't, not yet. Trust doesn't rebuild itself on a single phone call. But it was a start, and starts matter. Ryan came by more that winter than he had in years. Not with an agenda, just to fix a dripping faucet, or bring the grandkids to rake leaves I hadn't gotten to, small ordinary things that added up to a son actively closing a distance he'd let grow without noticing. Sean's visits didn't slow down at all. If anything, they became less like checking in on a grieving widow and more like two people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Which, honestly, is what I think they'd always secretly been, underneath the worry. By spring, the oldest grandchild, Kelly and Tom's daughter, actually, not Ryan's, though I'd assumed it would be Cody first, had her acceptance letter to a state school, and the first disbursement from the Lake Cabin Trust went toward her first semester. Kelly called me the day the letter arrived, and this time there wasn't a shred of strategy in her voice, just a mother, crying a little grateful. She doesn't even fully understand yet what that trust means, Kelly said. I don't think I fully understood it either, honestly, until I watched it actually help somebody instead of watching it almost get taken from you. I told her I was glad. I meant it. None of this happened because I gave a perfect speech at a dinner table in November. It happened slowly, the way real repair usually does, in phone calls and dripping faucets and root beer on a Tuesday and a debt counselor's office and one honest sentence at a time, over months, not minutes. The following Thanksgiving, I hosted again. My house. My kitchen. My rules this time, spoken plainly instead of just quietly assumed the way they'd always been before. It was smaller than it used to be, in a way I actually liked. Ryan and Melissa and their kids. Sean, of course, who these days practically lives at my house on Sunday afternoons anyway. Kelly and Tom and their two. The business is still recovering, still tight some months, but honest now, in a way it wasn't before, and honesty, I've learned, is worth more to a family than money ever was. Barbara, of course, in the good chair by the window, exactly where she sat every year of my life that mattered. I made the stuffing the way Gary's mother taught me. I set the good plates out, the ones that only come out twice a year, though I'm starting to think maybe they deserve to come out more than that now. When it was time to carve the turkey, I picked up Gary's knife, the way I always do, and I looked down the table at Sean, who was mid-conversation with his niece about something on his phone, laughing at whatever she'd shown him. "Sean," I said, "come carve this with me." He looked up, surprised, then came over, and I handed him the knife. Not because I couldn't do it anymore, not out of obligation, not because it was somebody else's job to do instead of mine. I handed it to him because I wanted to, because some things are worth passing on by choice instead of by default, and because watching that boy stand at the head of my table with his father's knife in his hand felt like exactly the right way to close a year that had taught me more about my own worth than the previous 63 had managed to. Kelly watched from across the table. And here's the thing I noticed, the thing that told me more than any apology could have. She didn't say a word about the house, or the trust, or last year. She just watched her brother carve the turkey, and then she looked at me, and she asked, quiet, genuine, the way you ask a question when you actually want to hear the answer instead of already knowing what you plan to do with it regardless. "Mom, are you doing okay?" "Really?" I looked at her for a moment before I answered. A year ago, that same question, in that same tone, would have made me suspicious, would have made me wonder what was coming next, what favor, what folder, what plan already in motion behind it. This time I just believed her. "I am," I told her. "I really am. They had planned my whole future without me. So I simply finished planning it without them first. And somewhere between the folder I brought to that table and the knife I handed my son a year later, I learned the difference between being needed and being loved, and I stopped mistaking one for the other ever again.